The New York Giants are at a crossroads with their future. How did they get there and where do they go from here? We break it all down today with special guest Mike Jones of The Athletic. That's coming your way next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com today to get started. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all my written work. And as always, welcome on into my Blue Crew community members, my everydayers, my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And today, my special guest is Mike Jones. He's a national writer for The Athletic. First time he's on the program with me, hopefully the first of many. Mike, thanks so much for taking time out of your schedule to come on with me.
Hey, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure, Mike. It's a pleasure to see you. Mike, so we've got a lot to talk about with this New York Giants team. It's a franchise that I think we can both agree is in a state of disarray right now. And I want to go back a little bit because, 2022, the Giants look so promising. Everybody was, Brian Daboll was coach of the year. Joe Schoen was being talked about possibly for executive of the year. And then everything just started to fall apart. When you look back over these last couple of years, where do you think the Giants planned to build up a perennial contender? Where do you think that went off the rails?
I mean, I think it went off the rails when they thought that Daniel Jones was a quarterback that was worth $140 million. It was great that they had that success to start off, but I think that success came sooner than what they anticipated. And then it also made them believe, hey, maybe we're better off than what we thought we were. Giving Daniel Jones that money was definitely something that obviously now in hindsight, it's clear that it was a mistake. It seemed kind of like a mistake at the time. I thought that maybe, we might see them try to hold on to him for 1 year and then see what happened. But to, sign him for a multi-year deal worth all that money, that was a big mistake. And then we just never really saw them start making moves to continue to fortify that roster. And then, you lose, a couple of years later, you lose Saquon Barkley. A lot of miscalculations and poor projections, I think, wound up costing them.
Just going back to the Daniel Jones contract for a moment, that year, actually before that offseason, they tried to re-sign Saquon Barkley and he wasn't signing in season. They tried again afterwards and just couldn't get a deal done. Do you think in retrospect, had they been able to maybe get Saquon signed to a long-term deal, that maybe they would have pivoted and said to Daniel Jones, okay, we're going to franchise tag you instead of giving him that contract?
It's hard to say. I mean, I guess you can say maybe they were like, well, look, we got to make sure we get one of these guys taken care of for the long term. So that way we have one of these needs met. I really would love to just know if they could redo it again, would they have, done the same thing? Or if we could put truth serum in them and wonder, okay, what really were you thinking and how, did you come to this decision there? Maybe. I guess you can say maybe if they had gotten Saquon taken care of, they wouldn't have signed Daniel Jones. But I don't know that would be the case because I think that they felt good about him, and they showed this past year that they felt like, well, a running back's a running back, sort of. They didn't feel like Saquon was worth paying, and they felt like they had their guy in Daniel Jones. So I don't know that having Saquon taken care of financially would have given them confidence to go get somebody else.
We see what Saquon's doing in Philadelphia, and it's easy to say in hindsight that they should have paid him. But for the long term, because we know that, the NFL is year to year, right. For the long term, Do you think they made the right decision there, given, the age, given the injury history, given just the circumstance, the state of the team?
I mean, I know that he had the injury history, and I know that running backs, their shelf life is not, you know, like other positions are. But he really was the key to the success. The reason why Daniel Jones was competent was they didn't ask him to do a lot. He was leaning heavily. They were leaning heavily on Saquon in that rushing attack, and that helped make life easier for him. So they had already shown, they had proven, it was proven to them that here's the recipe and we need this guy. And for them to then go opposite of what the body of evidence had proven them, it was kind of a bit of a head scratcher. And then also knowing that the risk was that he could go right down the road, and that was, their worst nightmare, was that he would go down to Philly and see him in the division, he'd be tearing it up, and that's exactly what's happening. So I just don't understand how it was they saw how important he was to their offensive operation and then let him go. And you know, if you had let him walk and you paid another running back a lot of money or drafted somebody high, and leaned on him, then it could say, but they didn't address that hole that was left by his departure, and that was wound up being very costly.
How much do you think, though, the offensive line problems played into this? Because, last year the Giants had a historically bad offensive line, partially due to injury, but partially due to performance. Joe Schoen took the money that he quote unquote saved from Saquon, poured it into the offensive line. So how much was that a factor, do you think?
I mean, I guess so. When you're saying, okay, if we don't have a quality line in front to be able to protect and open up holes for this running back, we don't need to invest heavily in him. But at the same time, look, the best way to kind of buy your quarterback some time is to have a healthy run game. And so, look, they spent money, they committed to Daniel Jones that they could have committed to fixing their offensive line. And I don't know yet if those moves that they've made along the offensive line have really totally panned out there. So I still just don't understand. Again, you have a guy, yes, I know he'd had some injuries, but he's one of the top running backs in the league. And you've already seen that your quarterback cannot handle that heavy workload. He needs a lot of support around him. And I guess, you're trying to be fiscally responsible, and, not nobody wanted to pay running backs, last year, and it wind up costing each one of those teams, and the teams that those running backs moved on to other teams are having success because of that. So, obviously, if they could go back, maybe they would do it again. But you look at their decision, and I just can't find the rationale behind it to feel like, okay, yeah, that really made some sense, and they just were unlucky.
Mike, from a bigger perspective, you look at the job Joe Schoen has done in building this roster. Now, it hasn't been perfect. Let's, make that clear. He's made some mistakes. We've just talked about a couple. But overall, when you look at the foundation from the draft class this year, you look at, some of the moves he made, Brian Burns and so on and so forth. Do you feel that he has done enough to build a solid foundation, or do you feel that he's at a point now where it's a make or break season and he could potentially be out after this year?
Yeah, it takes time, and we see some of these teams like the Houston Texans, who they get a new GM, they get a new head coach, boom, they draft their quarterback, and they're turned around in 1 year. And so there's not a lot of patience in the NFL. And so part of you feels like, okay, look, he's had 3 years, he didn't get it done, get him out of here. But then at the same time, it does take time to get some of these pieces in place. I just last week texted a number of front office people around the league to say, okay, hey, what would you do if you were the Giants? What would you do about Joe Schoen? And what would you do about Brian Daboll? And it was very split. Some people said to me, you got to clean house. I'm getting everybody out of there and I'm starting over anew. And then other people said, well, look, it's not like Daboll has a lot to work with. You know, a lot of these moves haven't paid off. They've got a lot of holes, so it takes some more time. You know, maybe you give them another year to see what they can continue to do in free agency and the draft and how they build there. So it's very split. So I was really hoping that my reporting was going to really kind of convince me in my mind one way or the other. But if professionals, people who like actually live and breathe this stuff and are in front office themselves and aspiring to be general managers, and if they're, you know, have different opinions, then I was like, man, well, I'm still just as conflicted right here. Part of me feels like, okay, need a new GM, stick with the head coach, see what they can do with a fresh set of eyes as far as the talent evaluating. But then the other part of me is looking at it, it's like, man, like it has been, you know, this amount of time and other teams have turned it around faster, and we've seen mistakes that have been glaring. And so because of those mistakes that are so glaring, you need to move on for them. And that's kind of where I leave as far as Joe Schoen goes. But at the same time, another person said to me, well, I don't know who he's going to find that's going to want to take that job because it's not a quick fix. But at the same time, there's always somebody who's champing at the bit for an opportunity. You know, I know that patience is something that John Mara has displayed. And so I really wouldn't be surprised one way or the other. If he stuck with them another year, he already said it, you know, last month that they were safe. Now, things could go south and he could wind up changing his mind. And I wouldn't be surprised by that either.
Hey, Giant fans, Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Prize Picks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy so that your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. Prize Picks puts its members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. Get your earnings in as little as 15 minutes. And Prize Picks now offers Venmo for quick and easy deposits and withdrawals into your account this sports season. Download the app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Mike, one of the things complicating this decision, I think at any rate, is the quarterback situation. You know, the question is, will the Giants draft one of these these top quarterbacks, which, you know, admittedly the class isn't as rich as it was last year in talent, or do the Giants go with a bridge guy, or you know, how do they approach that? Because that's obviously the number one issue with this roster right now. Who's going to be the quarterback in 2025? That being said, if they, you know, if you're making the decision, does it make sense knowing that, okay, if Shane doesn't get this right, he's out anyway, and now, you know, you bring in a new GM in 2026 and maybe a new head coach, and they're stuck with the quarterback. You know, they're inheriting the quarterback the same way Shane and Daboll inherited Daniel Jones.
Yeah, well, part of the problem also with that is there's not a lot of great quarterback talent in the draft. There's not like a Caleb Williams or, you know, there's no slam dunks in the draft. There's some guys that are going to take some time. So in a way, you almost continue to work to address, you could understand the theory if they said, look, let's get a bridge quarterback. Let's let Shane continue to work to improve our offensive line, work to improve our other weak areas. And then our table is set for a new GM to come in here and draft the quarterback that we think that is there. You know, you could argue for that because again, there's a lot of holes. This isn't a 1-year fix, but then at the same time, if you're just delaying the inevitable, I don't know where that really gets you either.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a tough decision because, like you said, the draft class isn't rich. Now, so that being said, let's talk about some potential bridge candidates, if you will. I mean, I know, if I'm not mistaken, I think Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, Sam Darnold are amongst those who, as of right now, will probably be available, pending, of course, what happens in the next few months and whatnot. But who do you think might hit the air, the free agency market? Who might make the best sense? Or maybe do the Giants engineer a trade? Say, for example, down in Atlanta, maybe, the Falcons decide, okay, we want to go with Michael Penix, so now we're going to make Kirk Cousins available.
Yeah, well, you never know how this thing plays out. If Kirk Cousins looks the way he did yesterday with the 4 interceptions, they could wind up. Yes, they signed him, to a multi-year deal. Maybe they could wind up being willing to trade, or So like you said, Sam Darnold, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Jacoby Brissett, Taylor Heineke, Marcus Mariota, Drew Lock, Jared Stidham, Andy Dalton, Justin Fields, Joe Flacco, Jameis Winston. Those are kind of the top guys there that will be available. And then you never know. Derek Carr, is another guy that possibly could be. And then you look at some of these teams that might make changes, and there could be cuts. As far as quality guys, I don't expect that Russell Wilson will be available. I think that he is proving that he is going to, that he is a great fit for their offense. I think that he'll be there. Sam Darnold, if you're the Vikings, yes, you drafted JJ McCarthy, but he's going to be coming off a knee surgery. So do you hold on to Sam Darnold for another year as insurance, or do you feel confident enough that Daniel Jones, with half a season in your system, can kind of recalibrate and learn, and he can be your insurance policy for JJ McCarthy? So then if that comes the case and you have Sam Darnold, then look, he's already proven that he can come into a situation. He's fine signing a short-term deal and proving it. Then, maybe he's a quality guy there. We'll see what happens with the Browns and Jameis Winston, because obviously Deshaun Watson is coming off of Achilles injury and has already, played terribly anyway. So maybe that's something where they opt to re-sign Jameis Winston. So maybe he's not a free agent. So some of these teams are going to wind up re-signing guys, and some of these guys aren't going to hit the market. Justin Fields, I think, is intriguing, and I think he's going to have a lot of interest. Whether I'm not saying, yes, the Giants, but teams like the Giants would do well to do their homework on him, because he's got ability. I think being under Mike Tomlin has been very good for him. He's also learning behind Russell Wilson and, getting the opportunity to sit back and study a veteran, which he didn't have in Chicago. So that's another kid that is possibly going to be out there that would be worth looking at. But again, when you look at this roster here of guys that are going to be on the market, a lot of these guys either have real question marks like Zach Wilson and Trey Lance, who look more like busts, but maybe they could be project guys. And then you have older guys like Joe Flacco, Andy Dalton, Marcus Mariota. Those don't really instill a whole lot of confidence if you're the Giants, and you've already gone through the disappointment of Daniel Jones, and then you have DeVito and you have Locke. It's really they're not in a great spot there, because I don't know if any of those guys really make you feel like, okay, let's plug them in there and they can help us win, outside of somebody like maybe a reborn Sam Darnold like we're seeing this year, or maybe a Justin Fields. I wouldn't feel good about Trey Lance, wouldn't feel good about Zach Wilson, maybe Jacoby Brissett, but he's very limited as well. It's not an enviable position that they're in at that quarterback position.
Yeah, it's definitely one that they've got to get right. Now, let's talk about Brian Daboll here for a moment, because Daboll, in my opinion, is probably not on as solid ground as Shane. I do think he'll be back, but you look at the product this year, and it's worse than it was last year. And at least last year you had injuries that you could maybe point to. Obviously this year you can point to the quarterback situation and whatnot. But in your opinion, how safe is Daboll? And if he does return, What does he need to change, or what does he need to do in order to solidify his standing with his job moving forward?
Um, you know, I think so much of it has to do with what he has at quarterback. Because we saw when he was in Buffalo, and obviously you're working with Josh Allen, which is one of the best guys here, but a lot of creativity. And then we saw him manage to help Daniel Jones play above what his previous ceiling was as they made that run for the playoffs right there. Now, things really they kind of ran into a wall. Is that because Daniel Jones was at his ceiling right there and everything Daboll did, he was not able to pull any more out of him? Or was that Daboll basically being at his ceiling and because he didn't have great talent, he couldn't get more out of it? I don't know. Again, when I asked a number of people, there were conflicting views. Some people said, nah, you know what? He's had enough time. They peaked in his first year and they got worse. And if you are a head coach, you've got to find ways to continually help your team get better. And then other people felt like, you know what? They made the bad move with Daniel Jones. He was working with what he had to work with. Some people even questioned whether the decision to go with DeVito over Locke was his decision or not. Was that, so there's differing opinions on him. I do think that, like you said, last year there were injuries and things like that that he could pin it on. But this year, not having Saquon Barkley, that was a big blow to an offensive, just from a design standpoint. And you've got, Malik Neighbors, who's a talented wide receiver, but then why does it take so long to get him involved if you are a really creative offensive mind? So you see these conflicting things, and it kind of feels like, you know what, maybe they could do better, or maybe, I don't know, if he's here, do you bring in another offensive coordinator to try to help him? It's going to be interesting to see. And again, I was trying to educate myself and talk to some really smart football minds that I respect and hope that I was going to have a conclusion on what they should do. And half the guys said get rid of him, and half the guys said keep him. And so I'm still kind of conflicted about this because I do think he's a good coach. I just wonder about the fit and wonder if the message, has gotten lost in the locker room.
Hey, Giant fans, get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play by play, and so much more, all on the very same page where you place your bets. Visit fanduel.com to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Again, that's fanduel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. I have to ask you about the coordinator situation with the Giants. Now, I think this year Mike Kafka moves on. Mike Kafka, of course, stripped up the play calling, but Shane Bowen, they hired him to replace Wink Martindale. Totally different system. I look at the performance of that defense and I question whether that was actually a fit in retrospect. I mean, what are your thoughts there? Do you think the Giants, need to redo that position again? And if so, can they possibly bring somebody in knowing that Daboll is not maybe on solid ground?
Yeah, that's the difficult thing because if you are a guy who obviously you want an opportunity to be a defense coordinator, but at the same time you're uprooting your family for a roll of a dice for a guy that might not be there in a year, and that means you might be out of a job in a year. So that could be a challenge right there. Also, the other risk is if you have young players that you've drafted, that you've gotten some of these positions, and they've got one defense coordinator and then you change to another defense coordinator. How is that going to hamper their development? And it's the same type of thing with a quarterback. You're not able to play fast because you're thinking, and not playing as instinctively. So it's tough to pull the trigger after just 1 year. But at the same time, if you're not getting it done, the pressure is on. And, again, that's why I think some people are saying, you know what, you just need a clean house. You can't leave Daboll there and then bring in, plug in this Band-Aid and this Band-Aid and then wind up having to blow it all up again next year. So I get it from that standpoint. And you were hoping that, okay, maybe the first half of the year, they were going to take their lumps. In the second half of the season, you were going to start to see some improvements that maybe, okay, they were catching on to the new system, the new coordinator, feeling more comfortable. But we just really haven't seen that yet.
Mike, if you had to take a guess as to how this is all going to play out for the Giants with Daboll and Schoen, what do you think is going to happen?
Again, John Mara said that they're both safe, right? But a lot of it's going to be determined how they look down the stretch. Even if they don't, I'm not saying they have to win out, but if they're not competitive, if they look like there's a lot of self-inflicted wounds and the competitive fire is just not there, then you're going to have no choice but to blow this whole thing up. I know you feel like maybe you indicated you feel like maybe Shane is a more solid footing than Daboll is, but I don't really look at him as saying that, you've done anything to really earn my confidence either. So, if they're not competitive, if this is ugly down the stretch, then I think you have to take a stick of dynamite to it and you get a fresh head coach, fresh GM, and go at this thing again. If they can be competitive and be close in games, I mean, I guess you can argue that maybe they deserve to come back, but at the same time, is it just kicking the can down the road? Are you going to be in this situation again next year and saying, we just delayed our rebound by another season because we were trying to be loyal and do the right thing? It really might be the best thing just to go ahead and clean house and just start all anew for both voices, because it definitely seems like this team is needing, a real jolt, a boost. And I don't know if holdovers can actually perform and deliver what they need.
Mike, final question for you. Joe Schoen at his bye-week presser said that he felt the team was getting close. Obviously, the results would suggest that is not the case, but objectively speaking, when you look at everything, and I'm talking about, the core that he's built, you look at, some of the veteran talent like the Dexter Lawrences, the Andrew Thomases, the Bobby Okerekes, are they indeed close? And if they're close, what are they close to? Being a competent team, being a playoff team? What exactly does close mean, do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess he's kind of got to say that. That's what he has to say. He can't sit up there and say to the fans, yeah, we're a long way off. We're not where we thought we would be. And because he's, it's part of his job is to sell hope. And also his boss is listening. And I know they've had conversations probably behind closed doors, but he can't say that we're not. He's got to also instill belief in the guys in the locker room who are listening to hear what he has to say. So he's got to say that. They do have some pieces here. They do have some talent, probably not enough talent. But then again, then it goes back to the question of, okay, if we have some of this talent, why are we not getting more out of it? And then that brings you to the question, is it that because we don't have the right coaches in place? So again, I don't know what close is. They don't look like they're close. The Eagles, when you think about, they started off the year 2-2, and it was shaky, and you're wondering if Nick Sirianni was going to be in trouble. And then all of a sudden, things started to click, and they figured things out, and now they're on this 8-game win streak, and they look like Super Bowl contenders. The Washington Commanders, who they have a talented young rookie quarterback. They started off the season on a strong note. They hit a little bit of a rough patch there where they lost 3. Then they came thundering back against Tennessee. They're a team that looks like a team that's close. They haven't had that success against quality teams. They've been scrappy. They've fallen short against Pittsburgh. They could have won that game. They fell short against Baltimore, could have won that game. They've hurt themselves here and there, but they are close. I feel like maybe they might squeak into the playoffs, as the final wild card seed. That's close to me. I don't see the Giants as being there. And so you got to kind of look at your division and see where teams are. And so, I'm trying to think of a team that you could say is close that's not winning right now. And, I don't know. I mean, you look at like Carolina, they're not winning games, but they've given teams a tough run as far as they almost beat Kansas City. They almost won yesterday against Tampa. Bryce Young is finally looks like it's starting to click. He's playing with confidence. He's extending plays. He's looking like a guy that they thought they were getting when they drafted him out of Alabama. They still have a lot of holes, but at least they're in the thick of things down the stretch of this season. They're seeing improvements. I don't know if you can point to the Giants and have the same type of confidence that, okay, hey, that's close, and I don't think that they're quite close.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. Close is just, could mean any number of things. So,
Right.
and it's been a struggle for Giant fans and those of us who have covered the team. I mean, we're talking a decade plus now with maybe few exceptions. So it has been very difficult, but hopefully, we get through the rest of the season, start fresh with whatever, ownership decides, and hopefully they get this team back on track, get the right quarterback in here, fix the defense, fix everything that ails this team. It's a big job for sure.
Yes, it is very big. And, that we all want to see somebody with a magic wand and turn a team around very quickly.
Yep.
But, it's not that easy.
No, it is not. Mike, appreciate you coming on with me. He is Mike Jones of The Athletic. You can check his work out over there. He's a national reporter and insider for The Athletic. Mike, again, thank you so much for coming on with me. If I don't see you, have a happy holiday, and appreciate everything you do.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. Have a happy holiday, and I'm sure I'll see you down the road sometime.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. Make sure you tune in the rest of the week. We've got all new episodes coming your way. For Mike Jones, I'm Patricia Traina. Giant fans, I'll see you tomorrow.